I said amanuensis when I should have said amanenchi. Um, it's one of those things I get wrong. I wanted to remind myself real quick, and my audience, but I definitely want to remind myself real quick. Because, like, reading the Bible, or, if we read history, we're tempted to try to personify, if feebly and fakely, a historian. If we study history, we all of a sudden take on the persona of a historian, right? It's especially bad with the Bible. If you study the Bible, or if you study Egypt, like, you take on the persona of a theologian, or you take on the persona of an archaeologist, or you take on the persona of a quote unquote alternative history enthusiast. We're familiar with these personas and we take them on. And that's always a great threat. Because there are variations on those forms, but essentially those forms have a governing principle. All of those forms have a false god. It should be noted that not all false gods, or well, no, I'll stick with that. Not all false gods are completely false, which is to say, some gods under God we could consider them angels, perhaps, archangels, all that. But like some gods under God, some propensities under a centralized organizing principle are aligned. Some are not. They're not of the same character, not. They're of the same ultimate form, but there's different mediarities. But looking up from where we are, it's kind of like, alright, so say, because there was the whole Aryan gig, the big heresy Nicholas fought with a miracle. Saint Nick, Father Christmas. Who created Christmas by giving coin to a few young girls. Who, even with his help, had what many of us would consider not super great lives, considering the context. However, alleviation is always welcome. Alleviation is always of benefit. Being transferred from a high security prison to a low security prison, that's a gift. To be taken out of solitary confinement and put back in your cell, that's good. Up until the point of salvation, up until the point of divination, up until the point of having become that which becoming becomes, up until the point of the fulfillment of the kingdom of God, heaven. Up until that point, every lesser upward, every less worser is more better. Having all that said, there's a billion ways to say it, but I just need to bluntly remind myself. Everything is under the influence of God. People say God is omnipotent, and in a sense that's true. But you'd have to negate God's love in order for God to be 100% omnipotent, all-powerful. God is omnipresent. God is omni-opulent. God is omni-optic. But omnipotent would mean that God has to negate his love. Now, God always reserves that right. But so long as we know that God has not revoked his love. I'm sorry I used the male pronoun. That is a product of my cultural, historical upbringing. I don't know if I'll live long enough to purge that from my subconscious, my programmed Pavlovian subconscious, not my innate subconscious. I just have to remind myself every murder, every butchery, every rape, every strangulation, every sidelong glance, every disregarding, great or small, walking in a crowd and just walking by. How many people did I walk by in Walmart today? 200, 250? I disregarded every person there. I had to. We all had to. Those are the, small murders we require currently to survive. The hope is it doesn't always have to be that way. Yeah, every rape, every murder, every poisoning, every manipulation. It's all under God. Every bowl of popcorn, every whack-off session, all under the purview, the omni-purview of God. Every triviality, every novelty, every joy, every laugh, every prayer, every hurt, every ache and pain. My mom told me when I was a boy, God loves you so much he knows the number of all the hairs on your head. And then as I grew older, of course, I disbelieved that as being ridiculous. And now that I'm even older, I realize how that is. And it's daunting. So daunting, I'm surprised I'm still upright. Sometimes I forget to remind myself that I'm surprised when I wake up in the morning. Because I always am. I'm always surprised and amazed that I make it out the door, that I make it to work, that I make it through the day, that I make it home, that I make it to my errands, that I pay my bills. Always late, but I pay them. Every bill. Every cocaine harvest. Every smut mag. Every bullet. Every potato chip. Every farmer. Every farmer's daughter. All. Under the purview. Every half-hour sitcom. Every oil tanker. Every horse. Every rape, every murder, every suicide. The sun. And the warmth in the full light of the sun. A hawk swoops down in the middle of a field, broad daylight, boom. Killed, done. And then, as dusk rolls around and night comes, the owl swoops down, and any mouse exposed is a goner in broad moonlight for those with those kinds of eyes to see, and those with that silence of flight. You know. And it's hard to find anything that has the power to choose. And I guess you could say one of the proofs of free will is just the fact that we see at the best of times, we see that larger picture. And we see how us helping us is the only way. We see it from different perspectives, both, physically and psychologically, spiritually, mentally. One of the things I was going to say in one of my previous videos was I started talking about, like, one of the things about Jewish people, you know, and then I went on to talk about bridge builders, and then I forgot what I was talking about, is that, especially early on, like, they were brutal. Fucking brutal. Came up from the dust, lived in the dust, fought in the dust, the sand, the grime. Because a lot of times when people say Jewish or Israel or, you know, Old Testament, you know, we think of Jewish people today. But man, those dudes back then, they were like bridge builders today. Bridge builders today, toughest fuckers on the planet. They are just fucking all fucking grit and gristle. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean just spiritual fucking steel. Iron. Just rough and ready, man. And in a sense, like, you can be as pious, you know, for instance, like, it's good for those who live, like, I think it's good. Like, because a lot of times we put, like, hard life against sheltered life, right? And we pit those things against each other. But it's not that at all. It's that within the rough and rumble life and within the quote-unquote cultural or cozy life, good and evil battle in each of those worlds as well. So there is a rough and rumble, rough and ready, rough and tumble class of quote-unquote, I hate using this term, but I don't got a lot of time, so I gotta break it down simple. Like, there are rough and tumble, quote unquote, good people who are philosophically, spiritually, religiously, theologically, psychologically, harmonically, holographically, eternally aligned. In a good way. And then within the rough and tumble bad, and then within the quote unquote cozy life bad, there's also an alliance, you could say. But we pit those two things against each other when it's not like that. We want people. It's kind of like the story of Buddha, you know, where he's like protected until I can't remember how old, but like he's totally kept away from death and suffering and all that. And then all of a sudden, you know, as an adolescent or whatever, he sees death for the first time and he's just stunned, you know, and then goes out in the woods and blah blah blah. But changes his whole life and puts him in a mood of contemplation. Now, if there were enough of those people, right? If 70% of the people in the world were like that, I mean, viewing death is one thing, but like, it gets so much fucking worse than that. And to be honest, really now in the world, so far as the vegan cross goes, now in the world there are so many people that just can't bear to see animals suffering. And if they were forced to watch animals suffering, they would stop eating them. And that's what's going to happen. Thank goodness. But anyway, yeah, like, people who don't partake in the suffering of the world, they're advancing all the other cool stuff that all of us who suffer needlessly can reach toward. They're not suffering, so they're doing cool shit. And we who suffer can turn our attention away from the suffering to reach toward the cool shit. And that's good. And as we reach toward them, they notice us. And as they look back at us, they see where we're at and the suffering we're amongst. Notice how I place myself with the victim. That's just my predilection, because I also recognize that even in my humble, aka disastrous life, I still have it better, despite myself. Definitely just accident of birth. I have it better than most people who have ever lived. I still live paycheck to paycheck. I wouldn't necessarily need to if I were more disciplined, but that's how it works out. And but that's still better than most people in the world have ever had it. So I have a bigger responsibility. Responsibility. If you have it better than most people who have ever lived had it, and you don't realize how bad your life has to suck. Like, your life can suck really, 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 really bad in America. And it can still be better than most people who have ever lived. And that's a fucked up thing to think about. And it's hard to accept. What do you do with it? There's only one thing to do with it. Give whatever little bit of extra you can give, and not necessarily in money. But for me right now, it just takes time talking on little videos. Right? That's my way of trying to make the sun shine through me. It's tough because I'm a dark crystal. I'm a dark gem. I'm a dark prism. I'm a dark mirror. I'm dark glass with dark water. That's me. But a little bit of that light gets through anyway. I wanted to talk about Yah, the moon goddess, who quite often is represented as, a woman figure with a crescent moon on her head, which almost look like bull horns or ram horns, with a big old red disk sun on top, or Mars. So it could be considered Venus and Mars, especially with the horns. So you have the red disk and you have the horns, so that makes it more Mars, more Martian. More Aries, more Ram, more Amram, more Moses, more Moshe, more Khnum, the ram-headed potter god of Egypt. More Abrahamic in slaying the ram. It's kind of like with ichthos, the word for fish. After Jesus came back from the dead, he ate a fish. That's the only time he eats any meat in the Bible. After he's already come back from the fucking dead, he eats a fish, ichthos, the Son of God, after he's already died and arisen but not ascended to heaven. Yet, we know heaven is unfulfilled. And he said he wasn't going to eat the Passover, which for him, because he was the lamb, he served only bread and wine. And he said he wasn't going to eat the Passover. And we know that he spoke Aramaic, so it's ichthos, which they use because the IC, because of Iosos Christos, or something like that. But in Aramaic, fish is nun. N-U-N, none. Joshua, son of Nun. The nuns of the church, none. Propagation, none. Increase, none. Propagation by shoots, planting, agriculture, none. Sprouts. The Vesica Pisces, the fish. Ichthos, the secret message. Yah, the secret Egyptian. It's like when Christians would write ichthos for fish, or the IC, the ichthos, or they draw the Vesica Pisces, symbol of the fish. Fish, he came back and he ate a little fish and honey. 6 Vesica Pisces around a honeycomb pattern. When you draw a circle with a compass, and then you draw those 6 circles around that circle, you come up with fish and honey. The seed of life. Nun. Who's the first nun? Mary. Mother.